The rain had stopped only minutes before Landon Pierce, one of Seattle's youngest real estate millionaires, stepped out of his black SUV and walked toward the quiet little cafe where his friend had insisted he go on a blind date. Landon didn't believe in blind dates. He didn't believe in love at first sight. He barely believed in anything beyond work, deadlines, numbers, and the empire he'd spent 10 years building from the ground up. But he had promised he'd give this one chance. So he waited, checking his watch, rehearsing the polite excuses he would use to leave early. He was prepared for boredom, awkwardness, maybe mild disappointment. But he wasn't prepared for the woman who came stumbling around the corner, covered from head to toe in wet soil, leaves tangled in her hair, shoes soaked and squishing with every frantic step, her breath fogging in the cold Seattle air. He wasn't prepared to see mud streaking her face like war paint, and he certainly wasn't prepared for the jolt in his chest when she lifted her head and he saw her eyes. Before the story begins, if you believe in kindness, unexpected blessings, and second chances, please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps us bring you more beautiful stories like this. Her name was Mara Collins, though Landon didn't learn that until much later. In that moment, all he saw was chaos, drenched hair, dirty clothes, trembling hands gripping her torn bag. She looked nothing like the polished, confident woman he had imagined. For a second, he stepped back, confused, almost annoyed that his time was clearly being wasted. But then she looked at him with a strange mixture of apology and determination, and something inside him shifted. Because behind the exhaustion and panic, her hazel eyes held a softness, a kind of quiet bravery, like she had fought her way through a storm just to get here. She slowed down as she approached, embarrassment flooding her features as she tried wiping mud from her cheek, only to smear it worse. When she reached the entrance of the cafe, she stopped, took the deepest breath her trembling lungs could manage, and straightened her shoulders. It was as if she was preparing herself to face a judgment she assumed would be harsh. And it might have been, if Landon hadn't felt that sudden, inexplicable tug inside his chest, the kind that reminded him of something he had long forgotten, humanity. They walked inside, the warm smell of coffee and fresh pastries wrapping around them. Other customers turned to stare at her, some with shock, others trying to hide their amusement. Mara kept her gaze down, her fingers digging into her palms, but her quiet voice carried a strength he wasn't expecting when she softly apologized for being late. She didn't give excuses, didn't ramble, didn't demand understanding. She simply apologized. Landon didn't know what came over him then. Instead of leaving, instead of judging, he found himself pulling out a chair for her, gently telling the server to bring her something warm. And when she looked up, surprised by the softness in his tone, he felt that tug again. Stronger this time. It wasn't attraction, it wasn't pity. It was recognition, as if he had stumbled upon someone whose soul spoke a language his heart used to understand. As Mara sat there shivering, small flecks of dirt falling onto the wooden floor, Landon finally asked what happened. And that's when the story truly began to unfold. She explained that she worked as a veterinary assistant at a small rescue center just outside the city. This morning, a mudslide on the nearby hill had trapped several stray dogs behind the shelter. She and a few other volunteers had rushed to save them before more soil collapsed. It had taken hours of digging, calling, coaxing battered and frightened animals through narrow, muddy gaps. Her clothes had been ruined. Her hands were scraped. Her hair was a disaster, but they had gotten all 6 dogs out alive. She had rushed straight from the rescue site to the cafe, desperately apologetic for being late, though it was clear her exhaustion ran far deeper than simple lateness. Landon listened, something inside him thawing. Her story painted vivid scenes in his mind. Rain pouring down, mudsliding, frightened animals, a woman digging with her bare hands. She spoke quietly, with no drama, no attempt to impress him. She spoke like someone who didn't realize how extraordinary she was. He found himself studying her face, not the mud, not the mess, her eyes. They brightened when she spoke of the dogs, They softened when she described the volunteers. They dimmed slightly when she admitted she had considered canceling the date, but didn't want to seem rude. And there, Landon realized something painful. He had never met someone who cared so deeply, so sincerely, without expecting anything in return. The hours passed, and the cafe emptied around them. Mara's clothes began to dry, her hair settling into loose, messy waves. Landon opened up in ways he rarely did. He told her about his childhood, how his mother had worked 3 jobs to raise him, how he had buried himself in work to escape the fear of losing everything, how success had become both his safety and his prison. He admitted he didn't know how to date, how to love, how to trust. To his surprise, she listened without judgment, gently reminding him that vulnerability wasn't weakness but evidence of a heart still capable of caring. For the first time in years, Landon felt seen. When their cups were empty and the sky outside had turned a soft evening blue, Mara stood to leave. Her clothes were stiff, her legs sore, her spirit almost drained. She apologized again for making a mess, for not looking presentable, for ruining what should have been a normal date. Landon shook his head, telling her that she had given him something far more valuable than a perfect first impression. Her presence alone had reminded him what real compassion looked like. But life, as always, had another twist prepared. Just as they stepped outside, Mara suddenly swayed. The hours of physical labor, the emotional strain, the lack of food, all of it caught up to her. Her knees buckled. Landon caught her instantly, panic flooding through him. She insisted she was fine, just tired, but her face had gone pale. Without hesitation, Landon helped her into his SUV and drove her straight to the nearest clinic. The doctors confirmed she was severely dehydrated and suffering from exhaustion. While she rested, Landon paced the hallway, a tightness in his chest he couldn't explain. He barely knew her, yet the thought of her struggling alone felt unbearable. When the nurse finally called him in, he found Mara asleep, her messy hair spread across the thin pillow, her face now clean of mud but still carrying traces of fatigue. He sat beside her, realizing something frighteningly gentle. He didn't want this to be the end of their story. When Mara woke up an hour later, embarrassment flooded her cheeks. She apologized once again for the trouble. But Landon stopped her gently, telling her she didn't owe him anything. If anything, he felt honored to have been there. She looked away then, her eyes filling with a quiet sadness. She admitted she didn't date often, not because she didn't want love, but because she feared she wasn't enough. She worked long shifts, made modest pay, lived in a tiny apartment, and spent most of her free time rescuing animals. She'd been judged before, laughed at for her messy clothes, pitied for her simple lifestyle. Many men she had met cared about appearances, status, or perfection. She had none of those things to offer. Landon felt something inside him break open. He gently told her that everything she thought made her less actually made her more. Her compassion, her resilience, her humility, those were qualities money could never buy. He told her that today, she had shown him a kind of beauty he didn't know existed anymore. Mara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at him with those same soulful eyes that had stopped him earlier, and slowly, a tear slipped down her cheek, not from sadness but from relief, from being seen, from finally being enough for someone. Landon drove her home later that evening, refusing to let her take a bus. The Seattle night was cold, streetlights reflecting across rain-damp sidewalks. As they pulled up outside her apartment, Mara hesitated before stepping out. She turned to him and whispered that she had never expected her disastrous day to end with kindness. He smiled, telling her that sometimes unexpected beginnings were the most meaningful ones. Days turned into a week, and a week into a month. What began as a muddy, chaotic blind date slowly transformed into something pure and steady. Landon visited the rescue center, not as a wealthy benefactor, but as a volunteer who wanted to understand her world. Mara met his colleagues, not as someone intimidated by wealth, but as someone who grounded him. Their differences should have pushed them apart, yet somehow they balanced each other, her compassion softening his intensity, his stability supporting her dreams. One rainy afternoon, while they stood outside the rescue center watching the dogs play, Landon realized he no longer remembered the world he lived in before she arrived. Mara had walked into his life covered in mud, exhausted, overwhelmed. Yet she had brought with her a kind of light he hadn't known he was missing, and all it took was one look into her eyes. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to support our channel. Your engagement helps us bring more inspiring stories to the world. Before you go, tell us in the comments, what did you feel during the moment he saw her eyes for the first time? And with that, the story of Landon and Mara, born from mud, chaos, and unexpected grace, remains a quiet reminder that sometimes the messiest beginnings lead to the most beautiful journeys.